Thank you very much, Deanna, for inviting me to speak today. It's really a pleasure. So today I'm going to be talking about two topics, and they kind of tie in together. It's how is a clinical trial initiated, how is it conducted, and what's it like for a patient to be a part of one? Now, has anybody been invited to a clinical trial or ever been a part of one around this room? Yes. No, so nothing. Okay. All right. So I work here, St. Paul's Hospital is an old hospital. We're hoping the new one's going to be built soon. My old office had asbestos in it, found out. So luckily they moved me. Anyway, so my position, as we've discussed, is I'm a clinical research coordinator. So I'm kind of the first line with, I deal with the patients throughout their entire visit. I'm lots of different procedures I take care of, and I also assist in the source document verification, and I manage all the data that's collected at our site visits. So I'm going to start with what happens when we get an offer at the endocrinology division at St. Paul's. We will get an email in most cases, or maybe the doctor I work for gets a call about a clinical trial. So I'm going to talk about the first three steps in initiating a clinical trial. It can be quite difficult to get it started. Firstly, it's an ethics application has to be developed. There is the Providence Healthcare Research Institution. It's a special institution that reviews any application for a clinical trial. So even though it might be well developed, it might not necessarily be approved. Reason being, it has to be obviously safe and ethical for the patients to take part in the clinical trial. So they get an arduous process. They get reviewed, and sometimes it can take up to a year to get them approved. My last, specifically for acromegaly, I have a clinical trial. It took about 6 months to get going, back and forth with the ethics board. So there's a budget that has to be developed because with research, with Providence Healthcare, we have to be able to make a profit so that we can also put that money into further clinical trials and further developments in research. A contract has to be developed between us as the site and also the sponsor. So moving on, there's different types of clinical trials. The ones that I work with are called phase 3 clinical trials. The ones that are phase 1, I'll just kind of go step by step. Phase 1 is kind of the really experimental phase. So generally, drugs are tested on animals firsthand, and then they're transferred over to humans for the first time, and that's a phase 1 study. So it's really to see, does it actually work, right? Does it have any effect? And then from there, if it's successful, we'll move on to what's called a phase 2. So a larger sample size so we can collect more data and see, is there a reason to keep going with this? Is there really any secure data? Because when you have a smaller sample size, it's really hard to see what's really going on, right? So phase 3 is where the real stuff happens. Often they'll have a placebo, which I'll get into later on, to sort of divide the data and see if it's really working. Now you'll notice the sample sizes are a little large. So with acromegaly, you get what you can get. There's not many people with acromegaly in the world. So a lot of the trials are actually all over the world. It's the one that I'm involved with. There's sites everywhere. I'm actually going to be going to Hungary in June so that's exciting. I'm very excited for that. Never been there. Heard it's a very nice place. So with acromegaly, for instance, my site is the highest recruiting site in North America, and I got 3 patients. Yeah, that's how it is. That's amazing. I even got 3. I was lucky to get 3. But across the world, we have, I think, just under 150 right now. And that's hospitals all over the world, right? So pretty amazing stuff. So phase 4, usually not necessary. What happens after a phase 3 trial was that Health Canada will review it, or in the United States, FDA will review it, and they'll decide, well, based on the data you have provided, should we approve it or not? And hopefully it's a yes. So that's what I'm hoping for with this new one. I can't disclose any information, but it's going to look, it's very exciting stuff. So phase 4 is basically just, we're going to pull in a bigger sample size if necessary, and sometimes Health Canada will say, no, you need to do more, but hopefully that's not the case. Moving on. So there's different roles for different study members. The investigator or principal investigator is the primary doctor who's in charge of the study. So I work closely with Dr. Ihad Orr in the endocrinology division of St. Paul's Hospital. He's an endocrinologist, and he's the head of everything, and he makes sure that everything is within conduct and adheres to protocol. There's also sub-investigators, so I have the lovely Michelle Johnson, Dr. Michelle Johnson. She's great to work with. She is the sub-investigator for the study. There's myself as clinical research coordinator, so I'm responsible for lots of different things, schedulings for one, and data collection and data processing. I'm also responsible for doing electrocardiograms on patients. Different procedures I'm responsible for. There's the pharmacists who will administer and store the study drug and destroy it and quarantine it if necessary. There's lab personnel. So lab personnel, depending on the study, they will either just draw the blood and centrifuge it, off it goes to somewhere to be analyzed, or they'll actually analyze the blood themselves on site. There's also nuclear medicine personnel. So they're the ones who conduct the MRIs, and we have them noted in our contract, so they'll receive a payment for each MRI they conduct or ultrasound. So big part of clinical trials is the recruitment and consent process. So how are potential subjects selected for recruitment? A big thing is we go through a patient list. So usually a doctor will have a large patient list they can pull patients from. So for instance, Dr. Ihad Orr had approximately, between him and Dr. Johnson, about 6 potential patients for this trial. And so we look at some values and we see whether or not they're eligible. So I'll go into eligibility criteria in a second here. That's will be on the next slide. So what is an ICF? The ICF is the informed consent form. So if you ever get offered to be part of a clinical trial, you make sure you read every word in this document, because there's can sometimes be some hidden information that may not be disclosed. Now, I do my best to disclose that information, of course, but I can't, say for every other coordinator. So it's also important to the clinical trial itself, because if we lose that document, we're in big trouble, big trouble. So what follows the consent process? Well, we're going to go into eligibility criteria. So there's going to be study-specific eligibility criteria. So if we're going to talk in acromegaly specifically, there's going to be different values. So for instance, growth hormone will be a value that we'll be looking at. Insulin-like growth factor 1 as well. For instance, there might be 2 screening visits, okay? And those are the initial visits where a patient comes in and gets blood drawn, okay? So for instance, in acromegaly, we'll say, well, you can't be higher than, say, 1.4 times the upper limit of normal. If you are, within those 2 consecutive visits on an average, sorry, you gotta go. There's no way you can come in. So we had an instance of something like that. It was really unfortunate, but it's for patient safety and also to make sure that the data is correct. And so screening process is like I described. Usually has a mean calculation. We'll have you come in for 2 visits in like a week or 2 weeks and do a bunch of tests. So here's some common questions. Does my decision to decline to take part in a clinical trial affect my standard of care? The answer is absolutely not. Absolutely not. Your standard of care will always be the same, whether or not you tell a doctor, no, I don't want to be a part of it. It's always your choice. How much time will be required for site visits? Will I be compensated? Okay. Most cases, yes, you will be compensated, because for instance, for acromegaly, there's lots of tests that need to be done. For instance, patients will be here for about 3 hours, and I'll be with them for almost the entirety of that visit. So it's kind of like if you work, taking those 3 hours, absolutely you'll be compensated. What types of procedures could a subject expect in an acromegaly-related clinical trial? Well, lots of blood tests. You're going to be coming quite often because, the biggest thing we want to take a look at are your markers, right? Your IGF-1, you're all familiar with that. So we're going to be taking, say, every 3 weeks or month or maybe every 5 weeks and kind of comparing as we go along, because we want to make sure that the study drug's actually working for you, right? Whatever that may be. You can also expect electrocardiograms to measure heart function, heart rhythm, MRIs, check on the pituitary gland, abdominal ultrasounds if you have a gallbladder, or checking for wall thickening. So lots of procedures. It's going to be quite a bit of your time if you do decide to take part in a trial. So, placebo-controlled clinical trials, this is a big one. I have patients who say to me, well, I don't want to risk not taking medication, right? That's not fun. Nobody likes that. You know, this affects my health, right? So placebo medication is, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's basically, it looks exactly the same as what you take, okay? But it doesn't do anything to you, okay? There's no effect on you. So why do they use placebo in a clinical trial? Well, because there's what's called the placebo effect, and it's very well known in science, and that is if you are given a medication that looks exactly the same and you're told it may be that medication, your symptoms may ease in. Now, we have to eliminate that from the data, so that's why we introduce placebo. And we also need to see, well, does the drug actually do anything, or is just people just feel better when they take an empty pill, right? So what happens to me on placebo? So for people with acromegaly, this is big, right? I mean, you don't want to have those symptoms. They're painful, right? So does this affect my treatment? Well, yes, but what's happened is, for the trial that I'm involved with, is that we have a predefined withdrawal criteria. So either you have an exacerbation of acromegaly symptoms, okay, or your IGF-1 marker goes up. So like was said earlier, is that yes, you may have a lower level of IGF-1, but I still feel terrible, right? So we make sure that, okay, within 4 weeks you're out of this and you're back on whatever you were on before. So whether that be a somatostatin analog or octreotide, whatnot. Okay, so it's running a bit short, but I want to have a lot of time for questions. So the potential for Health Canada approval. So it's taking part in a clinical trial it can be time-consuming, but the end effect is that you are helping the scientific community, right, with your data and your time, and you're also helping the acromegaly community, especially because you're offering your time and a lot of your blood to help others, right? And potentially have new drugs approved that might be better for everybody else. So what's required for a new drug to reach the public market? Well, like I said, you have to go through 3 phases at the minimum. And that could mean, you know, Health Canada, I want to say, is a bit more difficult to work with as far as getting drugs approved. You'll also find that more clinical trials are taking place in the United States, and that is because FDA is a lot more lenient. Health Canada is a lot more strict on what gets approved and what's not, and they have very strict policies. So we're hoping that, I won't disclose it, but we're hoping that the one that I'm working on, this drug, will be released in the next 3 years. So fingers crossed on that, because I would love to see it.
On your trials, I mean, I'm actually a different, obviously the patient is blind, but is it double blind?
It's double blind. Yes, so none of us know, so it's quite, it's interesting. Yeah. So I'll just to build on that, what happens, there's usually a placebo-controlled portion of the study. There's different portions in the study, okay? So double placebo-controlled portion of the study will have, it's completely double blind. The only people that know who is on the study drug are data management, and they don't talk to anybody. They're deep down in some basement. Yeah. So what happens is, at the end, as soon as the last patient, and this is coming up soon for my study, so I'm really excited to see those results. The last patient finishes that portion of the study, everything's released, and we find out what actually happened. So the doctors might say, oh, well, this person wasn't on study drug. What if they were, right? It's going to be extremely interesting to see. So with that, I'd like to build on question period. If anybody has questions, please feel free to ask. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.